G'day, I'm Yuki-san Dev, and in part 15 of this series, Unity for the Absolute Beginner, we will briefly go over multiple scenes and keeping variable values alive between them. Alrighty, so today we're going to go over multiple scenes and keeping variables alive with persistent data. So far throughout the series there's been no mention of multiple scenes, I think. Well, today we're going to create a multi-scene scenario. Now what usually happens when you load a different scene is that your variables get lost because the object they're attached to is either gone or reloaded. So in the first scene, if you had a variable named player name, for example, then when you load another scene, the contents of that variable are lost. So we're going to create a class member that will hold these variables with their values and keep them alive when skipping around scenes. So let's get into it. Now, I wasn't planning on backtracking to game 1 that we created earlier in the series, but since this game is rather simple, it might be easier to follow using it. But I'm not 100% sure if it is, so if it isn't, let me know and I'll make a simpler video without all the other code to throw you off. So I think what we'll do is add a scene before the gameplay scene where you could have a title or some rules or anything you want really. But what we will have is a field to enter the player's name, and then this name will carry through to the next scene and be displayed. Righty, so the first thing we need is another scene, so right click on your scenes folder in your project window and select create scene. I'm going to name mine menu and double click it to open the scene. Boom, now we just have the default main camera and the light again. Don't worry though, if you drop your scenes folder down in your project, you can see that your gameplay scene is still there and intact with all your previous work. Also notice that your project window remains unaltered. Every script, image, material can be used across multiple scenes. This is why you need to start naming stuff correctly at this point and keeping things tidy. If you can imagine 20 scenes and a messy project window full of vague names and scripts could turn into a real nightmare. Right, so our menu scene needs to be the first scene to load when the game starts. Because we created gameplay first, we need to change the order. So click on File and Build Settings. And click Add Open Scenes. So you should see both scenes in there and the order is the wrong way around. So menu needs to be 0 and gameplay needs to be 1. You can simply change that by just dragging the menu above gameplay in the window. Cool, menu 0 and gameplay 1. So now when you run the compiled game, the menu will be the first to open. We can close that window now. Okay, so now all I'm going to do here is add a input field for the player to enter their name. So let's see, first I'm going to change my camera from skybox to solid. And I'm going to make it black. Cool. Now right click the hierarchy and select UI and input field text mesh pro. I'm going to name mine player's name. And I'm going to set my pos X and Y to 0 to put it in the center. And lock the scale and scale it up to 3. Nice. Now we need a label to tell the player what to do, so right click the canvas and select UI and text mesh pro. And I'm just going to name mine label enter name. In the text field I'm just going to put enter your name and press enter. Now my text doesn't fit the confines of the fields, so rather than mess around resizing it, I'm just going to turn off wrapping down here. And finally move it above the input field. Okay, so we are set. So let's now create our script that will hold the player name and stick throughout the game. So first we need an object to attach it to, so right click in your hierarchy and create an empty. I'm going to name mine persistent data. Then right click in your scripts folder in the project window and create a C# script. And name it persistent data. And drag that script onto the persistent data object. Cool, just make sure it's there. Cool. Alright, double click your script to open it. Alrighty, so this script is not going to be used for much else other than holding variables, so we won't be needing start and update, so we can delete them. Okay, so let's type in some stuff first and then I'll explain it afterwards. So first of all, just after the first curly bracket for the class, type in public static persistent data instance, and then public string player name. Alright, then we're going to create a new method called awake with private void awake. You remember the order of methods. We want to ensure this gets loaded before anything else, so we use awake. That's the first one to run. Then inside the method's curlies, type in instance equals this, and don't destroy on load game object. Alrighty, so you remember how in game 1 when we wanted access to the script or the class, we had to retrieve it using something like this? Well, now we don't have to access anything in this script because we have created a reference to this class and given it the name instance. Of course, this name could be anything you like. We are in part doing what you might hear some people refer to as a singleton. This is using a single static point of entry through a static instance reference. So this is a perfect place to be storing player names, high scores, player health, etc., right? This is not the only way to keep a global variable, but it is very common, and although I think it does get misused quite a lot, with a system like this, it's very easy to get lost in the ease and just put too much in the script. Now, the keyword here is static, and it does need some explaining, which I think is better left for another video where I can show you how to use it. But in short, you could declare a static variable in a script that's not even attached to an object in the scene and get that variable value from anywhere in the game. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that, and I will get to it in a future video very shortly, I think, because it is important to get the concept, and it too can be misused. In a small test game like this, no worries, but in a bigger game, it might come back and bite you in the butt. Alright, back to the script. So in our awake method, we have instance equals this. This is assigning this script or class to our container instance. So it's basically referring to itself. So any script in the game that wanted to access the variable player name from in here, the line in the other script would be persistent data.instance.player name. And the don't destroy on load game object is a built-in function that protects this game object from being destroyed or deleted when you load another scene. So let's save this and take a look. So if we run the game, you can see the don't destroy on load folder. And if you drop that down, you can see our persistent data object has been dropped in there, and it will stay in there for the entirety of the game, holding whatever variables you have inside. So the variable player name could now be referenced or changed from any script in the project. Alrighty, let's get back into the script. Now we're going to put a function in the script to update the player name. Yep, we can put functions in here too. Now, you remember what I said before about how you could get carried away loading the script up with tons of functions and variables. Very easy to do and get carried away. I'm going to put everything for this menu in this script so that you can see the problems it causes at the end of the video. Anyway, a new function. Public void load game. And we need a parameter for this one, so string pn. PN's just, I don't know, it's just my abbreviation for player name. And then in between the curlies, type in player name equals PN. So when this particular function gets called from our text input field, it will assign the value in the field to PN and then assign that to our player's name. Then we want the second scene to load, so type in scene manager.load scene. And we're loading scene 1, which is gameplay. So that will load our gameplay scene. So if we save this and click on our player's name input text field on the canvas and scroll down till you find on end edit string and click the plus sign, drag the persistent data object from the hierarchy into here. Then select the no function and then select persistent data and then the new function we made, load game. Now, choose the function up here, not the one down there. Otherwise you will get a null value. Okay, so after the text field is filled in and we press enter, it will run our new function, which will in turn assign what you've typed in to the player name and then load the game. And run. Enter a name, press enter. Now, it doesn't matter if you die in the game, but if you see in your gameplay, you've got your Don't Destroy folder. Drop that down and then select persistent data, and you should be seeing player name with whatever you typed in the field. Cool. So now we can use that name anywhere in the game. So let's do that. So stop the game and double click your gameplay scene to open it and say yes to save your menu. Right click your canvas and select UI and text mesh pro. I'm going to name mine player name and then position it just above the score. Now, let's see, I'm going to have my game manager handle updating this field, so double click our game manager script to open it. Alright, so let's create another variable, public text mesh pro UGUI player's name. And now in start, we will update that name from our persistent data. So type in player's name dot set text persistent data dot instance dot player name. Right, so now our new text field will be updated with the player name from our persistent data, which carries across from scene 0 when the scene loads. Let's save the script and get back to the editor. Click the Game Manager object in the hierarchy and drag our player name from the canvas into the player name slot. Now our Game Manager script knows what we're referring to when we say player's name. And now double click the menu scene to open it again, and yes, of course, we save our gameplay scene and run. Type in a name, press enter. Righty, there's my name displayed in the game on the second scene. Cool, we're done. So that's a brief outline of persistent data in the game. Of course, you could have far more variables than that. Now there is room for a couple of errors here, so if you're game to carry on, then let's do some error avoidance. So as it is, it works if we enter a name, but what happens if we don't and we just press enter? It lets us continue to the game with no name. Well, that's no good, so let's fix that possibility. So create another text field in the menu canvas and name it name error. And put a message in there like, please enter a valid name. And I'm going to turn off wrap again and move it below the input field. Actually, I think I'm going to change this to red. Righty, now I'm going to disable it in the canvas so that it's hidden until we want to unhide it. Alright, back into our persistent data script. Alrighty, so we need a reference to that label that we just created so that we can activate it when we need to. So we'll do a new variable, public game object name error. And now in our load game function, at the top, put if pn and then a double equals and empty speech marks. Then in between the curlies, type in name error dot set active true. And then return. Okay, so we're saying now that if pn is an empty string, then set our error text to visible, and then return, which will stop the code below from running. Also notice the double equals, so we're not saying that pn equals an empty string, we're comparing them and asking it, does pn equal an empty string? So there's the double equals. Alright, let's save this. Right, click on the persistent data object in the hierarchy and drag the name error label from the canvas into the empty name error object field. And play. So if we enter nothing in the input field and just press enter, we get the message that says enter something, and the game does not run. Now if we enter something in, and the game runs. Cool. Problem 1 fixed. Now this game doesn't have the next issue, but if you were able to navigate from the gameplay back to the menu, we would get issues with the persistent data being replicated. So let's put a button in the gameplay to load the menu and see what I'm talking about. So let's get back to the gameplay scene. And in the canvas, create a button. I'm going to call mine menu and make its text menu. And just reposition it below the score. And now into our game manager script. Righty, we need a new function to call from that button. So let's make a new function, public void load menu. And in between the curlies, we're just going to load scene 0. So scene manager dot load scene 0. Right, so this function, when called, of course, is going to load scene 0, which is the menu. And save. Right, now click our menu button in the canvas and scroll down until you find on click. And click the plus button and drag the game manager object into the empty object field. And select game manager and then load menu. Done. Now we need to go back to the menu scene again and of course save your gameplay and run. Enter a name. Okay, game running. Now click menu. Well, we got the menu back, but look at the hierarchy. We now have 2 persistent data objects. And that doesn't really sound like a singleton, does it? Only ever supposed to be 1. Not good. So we need to fix that. So back into our persistent data script. Alright, so now in our awake method, type in above the lines of code if instance exclamation mark equals null. That basically means it's not equal to null. Then in between the curlies, type in destroy game object and then return. So now when the menu loads, the if statement is saying if the instance already exists, i.e. not null, then destroy the duplicate and return. If the instance doesn't exist or is null, then the script will bypass the if and run the code underneath. Alright, let's save this and run. Type in a name, game runs, back to the menu, boom. Only 1 persistent data and we still have our name. Yep, cool. Now there is more that we could do here, but I think that's enough for today. I'm still not sure that using this game 1 either made it harder or easier. I'm not too sure. I hope it came across okay. Now also just back to the subject is using singletons. Remember earlier in the video when I said I'd put everything for the menu in the persistent data object? Well, watch what happens to our name error object when the game runs. So it's OK in the menu. Then the game starts. And now persistent data doesn't know where that game object is because it's not in the scene anymore. Because we're in the gameplay scene now. And when we go back to the menu, it's still missing. Can't find it anymore. If that canvas object was referenced from another script, we wouldn't have this issue. Now there are workarounds for this, such as using find to track down the object each time, but that uses valuable resources. But it does make you think about using these singletons in the right way. Also have a look at the player name input field too, if you're curious, because there's the same problem existing there. Object lost. Nasty. Better to have had all of these in a different script, huh? So in the next video, I think since we've made data stick within the game between scenes, I think it's only fitting that the next one should be making it stick outside the game. So yep, the next video will be on saving data from the game to the computer, high scores and names, etc. So that when you run the game again, it can reload data from the previous session. So I hope to see you in the next video.